Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how you can use our tendencies module to analyze your own game and your opponent's game. First, I want to say a few words about how our tendencies module compares to tools like Poker Tracker or Hold'em Manager when it comes to post-session analysis. Now, Poker Tracker is an extremely useful program, of course, and we do use it ourselves. But in our view, there are two issues with using tools like Poker Tracker to try to analyze opponents' strategies. The first is that while Poker Tracker makes it really easy to query an opponent's range in a specific spot or to see your profit-loss history with a specific starting hand, it makes it a little bit harder to get a good overview of your opponent's entire strategy, where you want to see all the different lines side by side, all the different frequencies side by side, different ranges. And we think that that sort of strategic analysis, where you really look at the behavior in each spot as a whole, is extremely important when it comes to taking apart opponent strategies and finding leaks in your own strategies. And the second is that to get the most out of tools like Poker Tracker, you really have to be an advanced user. You have to find the relevant threads on 2+2 where people post custom SQL to build population models, for example. You have to have custom statistics, custom reports. And we think that there are a lot of people who don't want to spend that amount of time learning how to configure a piece of software. So when we built tendencies, our goal was to have something where you just put in your hand histories and then it presents them in a useful way, compatible with modern games. So we automatically classify, we group by stack depth, we group by format, by matchup, etc. And you just browse the output and try to find exploitable tendencies in your opponent's play, or you try to find aspects of your own play that aren't working so well for you. Now, before I walk you through an example, I just want to give credit where credit is due. And part of the inspiration for this module came from one of Will Tipton's video packs on HUSNG.com. So Will has built a similar tool for himself that he uses to analyze his own game. And in one of the videos, he uses it to break down an opponent's game. And we've sort of taken that basic model and hopefully improved it a little bit, made it a little bit more visually appealing, support for more game types was added, and so on. But I just wanted to point out that that's where we first came across this idea. And also want to recommend that you watch both of his video packs, really great poker theory content, regardless of whether you're primarily a heads-up player or not. Okay, let's get into the actual module. So the first thing you need to do to use tendencies is you need to upload some hand histories. To do that, you click on Load Hand History, you click on Browse, you select the hand history files, and you click Load. You can get these files either from your PokerStars client directory or from your Poker Tracker process directory, for example, or you can go into Poker Tracker and export some hand histories and then load those files, and all of that should work. And currently we only support PokerStars, but we have support for a bunch of other sites nearly done and will ship in the next few weeks. Now, this step can be a little bit annoying because to make the best use of tendencies, you have to upload as many hand histories as possible. And for example, for me, just to upload the example data set that I'm going to walk you through in a minute took about half an hour of just clicking browse and load. But we're also working on a tool that will automate this process for you. So please bear with us until that's released. Now, once you've uploaded some hand histories, what you see when you go to the tendencies module is your tendencies dashboard. And what this is a way for you to browse your database of uploaded hand histories, if you will. So what we do is when you upload a hand history, we classify it by format. What that means is we first check, is it a cash game, an MTT, or a sit and go? And then we see how many players there are, and we see what speed it is, if it's a sit and go or tournament. And then we check, how many players are left, because obviously heads up play in a 6-max hyper turbo is very different from bubble play or full-handed play. And then we classify it by positional matchup. So usually, you will have different strategies, small blind versus big button, then you will have small blind versus big blind. We classify it by stakes, by site, and then we have one tendencies tree for each opponent and one for the entire population. So let's look at one of these trees. So in this data set, I think the majority is hyper turbos. So we will let's look at this opponent's tree. So here again you see sit and go, 2 players, hyper turbo, 2 players left, hero in the big blind, micro stakes, PokerStars, and then we pick this opponent here. And here we see the tendencies tree. So the first level in the tendencies tree is the effective stack depth. And in this format, we differentiate between these 6 stack depths, 0 to 8, 8 to 10, 10 to 13, 13 to 16, 16 to 20, and 20 to 25 big blinds. And we also see what percentage of hands fall into each category, right? So 25% of hands are played at 20 to 25 big blinds deep. And in this example, that's what we'll look at. And we immediately see a problem with opponent's play, which is that he min raises 94% of the time, which is almost certainly not optimal. So let's look at the calling hands first, just to see if we can pick up any kind of pattern there. To do this, we click on the node, and then we scroll down. And down here, we see there were 2 hands that he called, and none of them went to showdown, so we don't have any whole card information. Let's expand that subtree anyway, just to see what happened. Click here and we see, okay, hero ISO'd, villain folded, and hero ISO'd, villain called, and then villain ended up folding. So presumably his calling range is rather weak. Can collapse that again and look at the min raise pot tree. And here we see that hero presumably adjusted to villain's play, because he 3-bet 37% of the time, seems high, and only folded 20% of the time, which seems maybe a little bit low, and called 43% of the time. Let's see how that worked out for hero. So first we look at the all-in 3-bets, expand the node and click on the node. So we see hero 3-bet all-in, pretty standard range. Maybe the king queen suited is a little bit weird, maybe that's better called, but you know, some ace highs and some pairs. And then we see that villain folded 33% of the time, called 67% of the time. That seems very high, but by clicking on the node we see, okay, it's only 4 hands, and villain happened to have a good hand every time. Okay, let's look at the non-all-in 3-bets next. So we collapse this node, expand this node, click on the node as well. Let's first have a look at hero's range here. So seems to be pretty value heavy, some bluffs in there, 7-6 suited, Jack-2 offsuit seems a bit weird, but it's only 5 hands, who knows, maybe this was game flow based. And then we see how villain responded. So villain 4-bet all in 20% of the time. And once we went to showdown, he had ace-8 offsuit, interesting. And villain called 20% of the time, and villain folded 60% of the time. So non-all-in 3-betting seems like a good play against this villain. Let's have a look at the times when he called, just for completeness. And what we see here is that it was only one hand. It went, see, we got a flop of 3-5-3, and hero went all in with backdoor flush draw and a gut shot, and villain folded. Okay, let's look at the pots where hero just called. So we collapse this subtree up here and expand this subtree. And we see 13 hands overall. We see hero's range here. Some of these are maybe debatable calls, but overall, also card distribution wise, we see hero might not have run very hot because they didn't have that many strong hands, or it might be because he really 3-bet all of the strong hands. Okay, let's look at the game tree again. So hero calls, we see a flop, we click on flop, and here we see all the flops. Now, in a future version of the tendencies module, we will also categorize boards, and then you will have several different nodes here, one for each board category. But for now, we just have one flop node, and we show you all the flops here, so you can check if the set of flops in the hand histories that you're analyzing was sort of evenly distributed or biased towards maybe monochrome boards or paired boards or things like that. Now, looking at flop play, we see hero checked 100% of the time, and villain bet pot 8% of the time, less than quarter pot 8% of the time, half pot 31% of the time, and checked back just over half of the time. Let's go over these one by one to see if we can make some conjectures about villain's post-flop play. So we start with the pot-sized bets. So what we see here is it only happened once and hero folded, so we can't really say anything about that since we've never seen a hand go to showdown and the sample size is very small. So we look at the tiny bets next, and then again only one hand. And what happened here is hero called. Hero chose to call with second pair, and then we went to the turn. Hero checked with third pair. Villain checked back. On the river, hero let out with third pair again for a specific sizing of 60, which was half pot. And villain called with third pair but a worse kicker, and hero won. So debatably, this was sort of a block bet on the flop, and then villain just tried to get to showdown. Let's look at the c-bet hands next. Collapse this branch, expand this branch, and we see three cases. Hero check shoved half the time, hero check raised 25% of the time, and hero check called 25% of the time. Okay, let's look at the check shoved hands first. We expand and we click on the node, have a look at the range. So here hero might think maybe shoving with 6-2 suited, a gut shot and backdoor flush draw is not the best idea. Let's see what happened. I guess villain folded in that case though, so that worked out. And in the case where hero shoved a pair, villain had a flush call, so that's pretty standard, I guess. So nothing really to say here. Let's look at the hero calling range next. We see again only one hand, and we saw a turn. 6-6 king jack, villain checks. We see a river, hero bets 50%, and villain folds. Finally, let's look at the check raising hands. Collapse here, expand here, and again we see one hand, and hero check raised a flush draw, villain re-raised all in, second pair, 5-2 offsuit, and hero called and ended up winning. Okay, and then the last branch we have is where we check on the flop. Let's have a quick look at that. We saw a turn, and now we see hero let out, so probed here 57% of the time, and checked 43% of the time, so that's maybe notable. And we also notice two different probe sizings here, 2/3 pot and half pot. Let's look at the first one first. Okay, we see hero probed with a monster draw, villain folded, so that worked out. And then we see hero bet out with second pair, gut shot, pair plus gut shot, so not really super strong hands, maybe a sizing tell here. But villain ended up folding 2/3 of the time, so that worked out overall. And the other time hero also managed to win. And then finally when went check on the turn, villain bet 100% of the time. And we see that the one time when hero called, not only did villain have absolutely nothing, not even any backdoor draws, but he continued his bluff on the river, which hero then bluff called and won. Alright, so that's how you analyze your play using the tendencies module. A couple of notes. First of all, the main limitation is of course sample size. So the deeper you get in this tree and the more specific the situation, the fewer hands you'll have, and the harder it'll be to really draw good conclusions about people's play. Now, remember that the villain that we used in this example, we only had 169 hands against, so that's not very many at all. And a regular opponent that you face every day, you will have thousands or tens of thousands of hands on, and it'll be much easier to identify patterns. Nevertheless, some patterns are so clear that even with a small sample size, you might be able to use them to make profitable adjustments to your game. So in this example, the thing that stands out most is probably the extremely high preflop raising frequency, and the other thing is maybe the turn continuation bet. Okay, now one final thing I want to show you is population tendencies. So when you upload these hand histories, we extract all the individual villains and build one tendencies tree for each villain. And we also build a tree for the entire population of villains, which is, you can think of as all individual villain trees, but merged into one big tree. So you go up here and click on population to get the population tree. And the first thing we notice is that we have a lot more hands, because we have all the hands and all of our hand histories put together in the population tree. And the second thing we'll notice is that the population tree is usually a lot less clean than the individual villain trees, because with so many different opponents, a lot more bet sizings will show up, a lot more different lines will show up. And so I'll only go into this briefly, and you can play around with it on your own. So let's look at starting stack play again. We go down here to the tree, we click on effective stacks, and we immediately see a lot of different things being done here. We have villains limping, we have villains actually folding, we have villains shoving, we have villains raising some weird size, and some other weird size, and 3xing, and so on. And now where population tendencies are really useful is to design your default strategy. So what you'll do usually is you start with the population model and look at what the common lines are in the population. And then based on that, you will design your default strategy. And then when you face a particular villain, you will check how that villain deviates from the population and adjust your strategy based on that deviation. So here, for example, we see that a typical villain raises with only 45% of hands, has a small open shoving range, actually folds about a quarter of the time, and calls a quarter of the time. And then these less common lines, these I wouldn't worry about at all since they're so rare. And the 3xing, I mean, depending on how many hand histories you have, might be worth looking into. For now, we'll just look at the most common case, the villain min-raise pre-flop. And here we see Hero's responses. So Hero has a couple of different re-raise sizings. Hero folds about a quarter of the time, and Hero calls just over half the time. And on the flop, we see that in this larger sample, Hero actually has a leading range, but most of the time Hero still checks. And another thing we see is now in this larger sample, we actually have quite a few hands in our hand matrix here. And you see that the color indicates how often each hand was observed. So a darker blue means more frequently. Okay, but I'm gonna stop here. So again, it's just as with the single opponent case, except that usually the branching factor is higher, and you will want to look at the high frequency branches first. So down here at half pot and check, and not so much at the 26 to 35% pot bet, for example. Okay, I hope I managed to give you an idea of how to use the tendencies module to improve your game. Again, we really think this is a great way to do post-session analysis of your opponent pool and your own play. And we think that basically everyone can get something out of this. I might also mention that we're looking at a couple of things like doing Bayesian inference and possibly some clustering or some simple machine learning like that on tendencies databases in the future. If you have any ideas or requests, please let us know. I hope you enjoy. Best of luck at the tables. Cheers and goodbye.